When my father walked into my wedding with two federal officers, I thought he'd come to stop the ceremony, not me. He didn't say a word to me, not even my name. He just handed the warrant to the nearest cop and nodded, like this had nothing to do with blood, or love, or the 46 years I had spent trying to make him proud. The church went silent. The music stopped. My fiancé's hand slipped from mine, and in that awful echoing pause, between the sound of my heels and the click of the cuffs, I understood something I never wanted to know. It wasn't a stranger who destroyed me that day. It was my family, and I'm Karen Brewer, the bride they chose to break. The bells of St. Helena cut through the damp air like blades. I stood at the altar surrounded by flowers, music, and strangers, everything but my family. 3 rows on the left were empty, waiting for faces that would never appear. The silence pressed against me until it felt like breathing underwater. Samuel's hand trembled in mine. I told him it was fine, but the words burned. When the minister lifted his Bible, the doors burst open. The sound crashed through the chapel. 2 federal officers entered first, and between them walked my father. He looked smaller somehow, older, but his voice carried the same command I grew up fearing. He didn't glance at me, not even once. He stopped a few feet away, unfolded a document, and said my name like it was evidence. Karen Brewer, you are under federal investigation for embezzlement from the Charleston Relief Fund. The words echoed through the pews. Someone gasped. Samuel's fingers slipped from mine. The officer stepped forward. My father didn't move. His face was calm, almost relieved, as if turning me in had lifted some unbearable weight from his conscience. When the cuffs closed around my wrists, I stared at the faint ink on my fingers from signing the marriage license minutes earlier. The chapel fell silent again. No music, no prayers, just the sound of my life collapsing. That was the moment I realized my family hadn't abandoned me at my wedding. They had come to destroy me instead. 6 months before that afternoon, life felt calm to the point of dullness. The days blended together in quiet repetition, and I told myself that stability was its own kind of peace. But peace, I would learn, can be a lie dressed as comfort. The Brewer house still stood at the edge of Charleston, its oak panels cracked and weathered, the family name carved deep into the front step like a reminder no one asked for. My father treated it like a shrine, the last proof that we had once mattered. After my mother died, he turned the house into a fortress of rules, and the man who had once been proud of protecting the city now guarded his pride like it was evidence. Dean, my younger brother, had long stopped pretending to work. He drifted from one failed job to another, gambling what little he had and coming to me whenever the luck ran dry. I sent him money each time, convincing myself it was the right thing to do. That's what good daughters did. Hold the line while the men around them fell apart. Then, one June morning, a letter arrived from the bank. The Brewer Family Trust was overdrawn by $40,000. My signature was on every withdrawal. Karen M. Brewer, written with confidence I didn't remember having. That night, I drove to my father's house. He sat in his recliner, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the TV light flickering across his face. I told him someone had used my name to drain the account. He didn't look away from the screen. If you didn't do it, who did? He said, calm, almost bored. Dean doesn't know anything about this? I asked. Dean's trying to keep this family together. You just keep tearing it apart with your questions. Something inside me cracked. I turned to leave. The game on TV drowned out the sound of my heartbeat, but not his silence. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A text from my father's number. Stop asking questions. You're making it worse. For the first time, I realized the threat wasn't from outside the family. It was coming from within. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the window sounded like a police knock. Every gust of wind like a whisper telling me to stop. I spent nights combing through the bank statements, tracing every deposit and withdrawal. Each time Dean had borrowed money, a matching transaction appeared in the family trust. It wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Worse, the withdrawals lined up with new mortgage papers for the Brewer house, each signed by my father, each using my name as secondary trustee. I found Dean at a riverside bar, the one he used to haunt when he still believed in luck. His smile came too easily when he saw me. When I brought up the money, he shrugged. "It's family money," he said. "You're acting like a stranger." "Because you turned me into one," I told him. When I stepped outside, a man was waiting near my car. His voice was low, familiar with authority. "Your father told me to warn you. Drop it." My breath froze. My father used to say that threats were the language of criminals. Now he spoke it fluently. A week later, I sent out my wedding invitations. Each one that went to my family came back unopened, edges damp with rain. I held them in my hands until the ink bled, refusing to believe what I already knew. My phone buzzed again. 4 words from my father. "Don't expect us there." I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was grief. Either way, I didn't know that the moment I read those words, my family had already started rewriting the story, one where I would become the villain they needed. 3 weeks before the wedding, the call came just after lunch. My assistant's voice trembled through the phone as she said there was something I needed to see. On my monitor, an email subject blinked like a warning siren. Whistleblower, misappropriation of relief funds by K. Brewer. The room fell quiet. I opened the message. My name sat across fake ledgers and doctored receipts, every figure precise, every timestamp cruelly perfect. Whoever had done this hadn't made a mistake. They'd built a case. Within hours, I was placed on administrative leave. The board announced an internal investigation. When I asked where the evidence had come from, the compliance director replied matter-of-factly, "From a retired police contact who vouched for its authenticity." I didn't need to ask who. There was only one retired cop who still wanted to control my life. That night, I drove to my father's house. The porch light glared like an interrogation lamp. He opened the door before I could knock, face half lit by the glow of the TV. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "It was you. You sent those emails. If I did, it was to protect what your mother built. She built this family on love, not lies." His expression didn't change. The silence between us felt final. When I stepped off the porch, my phone buzzed. 3 words from Dean. "Stop digging. Karen." My father once told me silence was a kind of shield. That night, I learned it could also be a shovel. The next morning, I was summoned to the precinct. A detective played a grainy surveillance video. A woman at an ATM near the Relief Funds Bank, withdrawing cash. Her face blurred, her posture eerily familiar. Then the light hit her hand, a flash of silver. "That's not me," I said quietly. "I'm allergic to silver." The detective scribbled something down, unimpressed. The truth never shined as brightly as a lie that fit the narrative. When I walked out of that station, the world suddenly looked smaller, colder. If my father could forge justice, Dean would carry it out, and together, they'd bury me under it. I don't remember planning the wedding after that. I moved through each day as if following instructions left by someone else. Book the florist, confirm the menu, smile when people ask about happiness. I was running a dress rehearsal for a life that no longer existed. Samuel tried to hold on. He told me to be patient, that the truth would come out, that I needed to stay calm. But every time he said they'll figure it out, I wanted to scream, "Let them? It's not them, Samuel, it's my family." He looked away, and that silence became the first fracture between us. The morning of the wedding, Charleston wore a sheet of gray sky. I remember thinking that if I could just make it through this day, maybe the storm would pass. But when the doors of St. Helena burst open, I knew the storm had only begun. My father entered, 2 federal officers behind him, holding a folded warrant in his hand. "Karen Brewer, you're under federal investigation." The room spun. I heard whispers slicing through the air, people recognizing my name from the news, someone muttering about the firefighters' fund. Samuel's grip loosened. The warmth left his hand. My father's eyes locked on mine. There was no fury there, no pain, only the cold triumph of a man convinced he was right. "You did this," I said. "You did it to yourself." The cuffs clicked, steel on skin. A candle flickered beside the altar, then went dark. They said it was just the wind, but I knew better. Later, in the holding cell, white light spilled across gray walls. My reflection stared back from the metal table. No longer the daughter, no longer the bride, just a woman stripped of both titles. A young officer slid a document toward me. Initial charges. He hesitated, lowering his voice. Off the record, ma'am. Your father said you'd confess quickly. Said you're too proud not to. A laugh escaped me, hoarse, broken. Nothing like amusement. He didn't want me punished. He wanted me erased, and pride, it seemed, was the only thing I had left to lose. After my release, I drove back to the Brewer house. It was nearly dusk when I pulled into the gravel drive. The porch light still burned out. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its windows clouded with grime, its shutters hanging crooked like broken eyelids. Once, it had been the sound of my childhood, my mother's humming, my father's heavy boots on the stairs. Now it smelled like mold and guilt. Inside, dust coated everything. I turned on the lamp in my mother's old office. Papers lay in uneven stacks, edges curling, covered in the fine gray of neglect. When I opened the bottom drawer of her desk, something hard clinked against the wood. An external drive, labeled Brewer Trust Archives, 2016-2020. My heartbeat doubled. I plugged it into my laptop. Files flooded the screen, hundreds of transfers, each one signed H. Brewer. But the account used my credentials. K. Brewer. My father had stolen my access. My name had been his mask. I called the only person left I trusted. Aiden Cruz, one of my father's former trainees. I told him what I'd found. There was silence. Then his voice, rough but steady. I owe your father my career. But I owe you the truth, by morning. Aiden was in Charleston. He extracted the metadata. Every file had been edited in March, right when Dean's gambling spiraled out of control. My father had drained charity funds to save his son. That night, the phone rang. You shouldn't have touched that drive, a low voice warned. You still don't get it. We were trying to protect you, Dean. Behind him I heard bar chatter, country music, and the clang of glasses, the Rusty Bluff bar. I told Aiden, and his expression turned grim. That's the same bar where the ATM footage was filmed. The next day, Mr. Willis, my old neighbor, called to say he'd seen a blonde woman entering my house late at night using a key. When I showed him photos, he pointed at one instantly. Lydia Marks, Dean's ex-wife. She looks like me, I whispered. That's the point, Aiden said. That evening, I returned home. The front door was ajar. The drive was gone. On the table, a note scrawled in blue ink read, You're destroying what's left of us. Stop. I stood frozen under the streetlight slanting through the curtains, remembering my father's old lesson. A good cop always knows when to burn the evidence. He had, and now Dean had followed suit. Aiden and I sat in his car, rain pounding on the windshield. He balanced his laptop on his knees. I recovered the backup, he said. You were right. Your father's signature is everywhere. He changed the timestamps himself. The confirmation hit harder than the accusation ever had. Being wrong would have hurt less. We turned the files in to the prosecutor's office. By dawn, every news outlet carried the same headline. Ex-officer Harold Brewer under investigation in daughter's case. The Brewer name, once a badge of honor in Charleston, now sounded like a curse. That afternoon, an unmarked envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside, a note. You should have protected Dean like Mom did. The handwriting tilted slightly to the right. I recognized my father's hand instantly. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the letter my mother wrote before she died. Don't let this house define you. It's made of pride, not love. If one day they turn against you, walk away. Because I couldn't. She had known. She had kept quiet to preserve their pride, and I had inherited the cost of that silence. Later that night, Aiden called. On his laptop, a grainy video showed Dean carrying a metal box to the bridge, then throwing it into the river. Lightning illuminated his face. There was no anger, only fear. He's not mad anymore, I said softly. He's scared. Of what? Of losing the family name. Thunder rolled across Charleston. Rain battered the roof of the Brewer house, relentless, like the truth itself demanding to be heard. And for once, I didn't look away. The Charleston County courtroom was overflowing. Reporters crowded the aisles. Cameras aimed at me like weapons. I sat still, more exhausted than afraid. Across the room, my father sat rigid in his navy suit, eyes hollow. Dean hunched behind him, gripping the bench like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The prosecutor rose. "We have video evidence of the defendant withdrawing funds under the alias K. Brewer." The screen flickered to life. A woman, same height, same build, at an ATM. The light glinted off a silver ring. My voice cut through the silence. "That's not me. I've been allergic to silver since I was 12. Aiden stepped forward, presenting the metadata. The timestamps had been altered, the last login traced to Dean Brewer. Another screen showed Rusty Bluff Bar, Dean and his ex-wife Lydia withdrawing cash the same night I was accused. Dean's head dropped. The prosecutor pressed him. My father leapt up, shouting, "Stop this! She'll destroy us all!" Dean broke. "You already did, Dad. You used her name to save yourself." The jury returned swiftly, not guilty. I didn't cheer. I just listened to the rain outside, steady and soft, like the sound of truth finally being heard. After the verdict, Charleston erupted. Every paper, every broadcast carried the same headline: Ex-Officer Harold Brewer under investigation for fraud. Reporters camped outside my door for days, but I had nothing left to say. The noise didn't sound like justice. It sounded like aftermath. When the police came for my father, I stood across the street, unseen. He didn't resist. He simply looked at me as they cuffed his hands. No pride left in his eyes. Only the hollow weight of a man who'd built his whole life on reputation and finally watched it collapse. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I turned away. Dean was sentenced to probation. He looked older than I remembered, quieter too. I wondered if guilt would be enough of a punishment, or if it would become his only companion. Days later, Aiden found one last envelope in the Brewer house, a letter my father had written but never mailed. "Karen, if you ever see my name in shame, remember I was trying to protect what I thought was love. I couldn't protect you because I didn't understand you." I read it over and over until the words blurred. My father had never been a monster, just a man so trapped in his own armor that he mistook pride for love. 3 months later, I left Charleston. I sold the house, the land, the memories. With the money, I opened the Savannah Women's Finance Center, a place for women who'd been deceived by the very people meant to protect them. I never saw my father again. But sometimes, when the wind moves through the river oaks at night, I hear it. His voice, low and rough, finally stripped of authority, not haunting, just human. And somehow, that's enough. 2 years later, Charleston glowed beneath a sky the color of melted gold. The same church that had once witnessed my humiliation now shimmered with warmth and music. I sat in the front pew of St. Helena, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and old wood polished to a soft shine. Beside me, Samuel sat quietly. He didn't speak. He just reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a gesture that said more than any apology could. Between us, there was no more silence that hurt, only the kind that heals. The organ began to play, deep and steady. Then the doors opened. Emily stepped through, wrapped in white silk, her veil trailing behind her like a piece of light. Every step she took down the aisle felt like rewriting the past, each note of music mending something that had once broken inside me. When the priest asked, "Who gives this woman away?" Emily turned her head, her voice calm and sure through the veil. "My mother does." She showed up. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to pause. Then the bells rang, rising through the vaulted ceiling, the same sound that had once followed the clatter of handcuffs. But this time, it didn't sound like judgment. It sounded like grace. I inhaled deeply, letting the sunlight pour across my face. Around me, every seat was filled. No empty rows, no whispers, no eyes waiting for me to fall. Only faces I loved, and the quiet pride that comes from surviving without bitterness. I looked at my daughter, the woman she had become, and realized I was finally free. Not from my family's name, but from the need to be redeemed by it. We can't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the ones we stand beside. And when my daughter said those words, I understood what it truly meant to show up.